Hello friends, today we're going to talk about cityscapes and architecture. To start, we need to talk about what is an architect? What is architecture? So, what does an architect do? An architect is someone who designs architecture. Architecture is buildings, or in our case, it's going to be buildings. So think about your house, think about buildings that you see around town. An architect is the person who designs those buildings. Can you say architect? So an architect is the person who designs them. Architecture is the art and process of designing and constructing buildings. So right here I have 3 different buildings. One that I'm pretty sure you'll know, maybe you'll know all 3. So the first building is the Batman building or the AT&T building, and this building is in downtown Nashville. So if you've ever been to downtown, you might have seen the Batman building. It's this big blue and silver building. This building in the middle is the Taj Mahal, and it's in India. It's very different architecture. It doesn't look like an office building because it's not, and it's got a lot more detail. You can't see from this picture, but there's a lot of detail in the windows and in the marble that it is made out of. And then the far right picture is the Eiffel Tower, and that's in Paris. And it also has a very different architecture. It starts big at the bottom and gets skinny at the top, and that's because it is a tower. So we're going to talk about a couple different architects before we get started. So the first architect we're going to talk about is Antoni Gaudí. Can you say Gaudí? So Gaudí was a Spanish architect, and most of his famous artwork and architecture is in Barcelona, Spain. His artwork is very fanciful. It's fancy. I don't know the better way to say that, but it looks like buildings or architecture. A lot of his art looks like it comes out of a movie or out of something that came right out of your imagination. So instead of being really simple and just being rectangles and squares, he uses lots of organic shapes, which we talked about organic shapes at the beginning of the year, shapes that don't have names, that are inspired by nature. So Gaudí uses lots of organic shapes in his architecture. The next artist is Frank Lloyd Wright. And Frank Lloyd Wright was an American architect who believed in creating structures in harmony with people and the environment. So he really wanted to bring humans into the nature. He really wanted to pay attention to not disrupt the nature that was already there and to use what was already there. So instead of tearing down lots of trees, he liked to use those trees in his buildings or to build right around them. The building on the left, you can see there's a waterfall that just goes right out of the house, and that was already there when the house was built right on top of it. So he uses the land where he's building the houses or the buildings as his inspiration. The next architect is Zaha Hadid. Can you say Hadid? So Zaha Hadid was born in Iraq, and she was the first woman to ever receive a prestigious award for her architecture, which means she was the first woman to earn a really, really big award for her architecture. And her architecture looks like it's from the future. It's got lots of curves, lots of really simple colors, but it kind of looks like spaceships or buildings that you might see in the future, which I think is really cool. So we're going to create architecture for a cityscape. Can you say cityscape? So what is the difference between a cityscape and a landscape? So there are differences. So we've talked about a landscape before. A landscape is a picture of the land. Landscapes have horizon lines. Cityscapes also have horizon lines, but they're a little different because it's not where the hills or the trees are, it's where the buildings are. So a horizon line is a little bit bumpier, it's a little bit more geometric. We talked about the word geometric in the fall. Usually talks about rectangles and circles, it's shapes with names or geometric. And so geometric means it's a little sharper. It's not as free-flowing and organic. It's the opposite. So a cityscape is a picture of a city. A landscape is a picture of the land. So we're going to make our own drawings of cities, but these aren't just going to be any boring cities. We're going to make some cities inspired by the artist James Rizzi. James Rizzi was an artist who made lots of pictures of cityscapes because he loved his city, New York City. All of his cityscapes have really fun, silly faces, and they're really bright colors. He really loved to spread joy and really wanted everyone to remember that we shouldn't take what we have for granted. And so he loved to spread that joy. Just like Chris Uphughes, the artist who we did silly faces on our hearts with, they had a similar theme in their art that they wanted to spread joy and happiness to other people. So when we make our cityscapes, we want to take some inspiration from James Rizzi and make our buildings silly and colorful too. All right, friends, so what you'll need today is just a pencil, and you can either use a Sharpie or a black crayon. So we're gonna trace our lines with Sharpie or black crayon at the end, but to start, you'll just need a pencil. You'll probably want an eraser too. So if your pencil doesn't have an eraser, find one with an eraser. So to make a cityscape, we're gonna start with some geometric shapes, mostly rectangles, to start drawing our buildings. We're going to start with the foreground. Can you say foreground? So the foreground is the front. Those are the buildings that are going to be closest to us. So I'm going to start by drawing somewhere between 5 to 8 rectangles that will be my the front of my city. So I'm going to start on the edge of the page, and I'm just going to be drawing horizontal and vertical lines. Now I want to make sure that my buildings are not too thin so that they don't get too skinny and I can't add details. They can be different heights, they can be different widths. You could have short buildings, you could have tall buildings. So I think I'm just gonna draw 5, maybe 6 in the front here. Maybe I'll do a tall, skinnier one right here. Whoops, this Nestrix line got a little curvy right there. There we go. Then I'll finish it off with just a straight line right there. So this building might just be going off the page a little bit. So this is our foreground. Then we want to add a little bit of, or a couple buildings behind. This will be our middle ground. So these buildings aren't in the front, but they're not really far away either. We can do this by overlapping. Can you say overlapping? So overlapping is when one thing is in front of another. So say I have my phone case in my hand. If my phone case is on top of my hand, you can't see all of my fingers because my phone case is on top. So these buildings in our foreground are in the front. So part of the buildings that are behind won't be able to be seen. So I'm going to come over here. Maybe I draw 3 to 5 buildings behind, and I'm just drawing horizontal and vertical lines. They don't have to touch. Maybe this one goes behind and there's a building right there. Let's see, and maybe I'll do one more in the very far away that's back here. So my paper is actually a little smaller than yours because Miss Nestrick left her sketchbook at home at school over the weekend on accident. So this is my small sketchbook. Leave a little bit of room in the sky, but I would love to have at least 2 layers of buildings. So 5 to 8 buildings in the front and then 3 to 5 in the middle ground. So once you've done your buildings, yours don't have to all be rectangles. You could do squares. You could have buildings that stair step a little bit. So maybe I come in here and I erase this building that was right here. Maybe I want to make it a little bit more interesting and I make it a funny shape building. Maybe you add, maybe one of your buildings, instead of being flat on the top, maybe you decide that you want to have a curved roof. You can do that too. So your buildings don't have to all be rectangles. I don't want to give you too many ideas because I find that kids are the most creative, but if adults give them too many ideas, they think those are the best ideas, when really the best ideas are in your head, not in my head. So if you want to make silly buildings, you absolutely can. I'm going to be looking that you have at least 8 buildings on your page. They can be in the foreground, in the middle ground, but I want to count at least 8. So let's see, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I kind of have 9, 10 right here, but these are really skinny. So once I have the basic shapes of my building, remember you can pause if you're still coming up with some creative ideas. We want to go ahead and add those silly faces. I want at least 5 of your buildings to have silly faces. How many buildings? 5 buildings should have silly faces. Now these faces can be any face that you want. You could think about the faces that you used with Chris Uphughes. You could think about how your buildings are feeling. Maybe they're talking to each other. So I'm gonna add some silly faces to my buildings. Remember, your ideas are better than Miss Nestrick's ideas. You guys are so creative. So just because I'm making these faces does not mean that you have to. Remember to add eyes, nose, and a mouth. I'm getting some of my ideas from James Rizzi. Maybe I'll add some teeth with a wavy line. And remember, think about lines and shapes that we've been talking about all year. You guys know lots of lines and shapes at this point. So how could you turn those into parts of the face? Maybe this one's gonna have lots of hearts. Let's see, maybe its tongue is sticking out. The beautiful thing about pencils is that you can always erase and go back and change some things. I feel like for some reason this looks like a dog. Maybe I have a dog building. So I'm gonna add some more faces and I'm gonna fast forward. You keep adding your faces and then when you're finished, you can hit play again. So once I've added the faces to at least 5 of my buildings, I can go back and add other details to make these buildings fun. Maybe I change the shape of the roofs. And then also we need to make sure, since these are buildings, that they have windows and doors. So go back, change maybe some details. Maybe you decide that some of your buildings are too rectangular and you need to add some other details. Maybe you want to add some fun roofs and then make sure that you add doors and windows. Make sure that each of your houses or each of your buildings is different. You don't need to make 5 of the exact same building. What makes these cityscapes fun is that they're all different. So feel free to make the windows different shapes and sizes. Same with the doors. These can all be different. So friends, once you finish drawing all of your windows and doors, Miss Nestrick forgot a door on this building. So once you have added all of your windows and doors onto your buildings, take a Sharpie or a black crayon. We are going to paint these just like we've painted some of our other projects in a couple weeks. So make sure that it's a Sharpie, something permanent, or a black crayon, and trace over all of your lines. Whew. Now, I don't know about you, but my hand's tired. So I think this is a great place to stop. Next week, we'll come back and we will work on coloring these. We might start painting these next week, but we might wait a little bit too. So make sure that you've got at least 5 buildings with faces, that you have some buildings in the front, in the foreground, and then some buildings overlapping behind. Make sure that you've got windows and doors, or doors. Not all of my buildings have doors, which is kind of silly, but I tried to add some where I could. and make sure that you outline in either black Sharpie or in crayon. When you're finished, you can take your eraser and go back and erase any lines that you didn't trace very well. There were a couple that I either changed where I was going while I was tracing it, or I just completely missed the line while I was tracing it. So if there are any pencil lines that are really sticking out, you can go back and erase those so that it's nice and crisp for next week. So keep up with these and we'll work on our Rizzi drawings next week. Good luck. If you have any questions, make sure to message me on Schoology. Adios, friends.